The floor of the arena burns under my boots before the fight even starts. Not real fire. Something worse. A field of energy that makes every nerve in my body scream that I am standing on the edge of a blade. I do not step back. Stepping back here means death, and I did not travel 400 light years just to die on my first day. My name is Daniel Hartley, and 3 hours ago I was a salvage pilot with a busted engine and a debt collector who wanted my ship. Now I am standing in the center of the Kael'thari Sundering, the biggest tournament in the known galaxy, facing a creature built entirely out of gray stone and hatred. They call him Threx. He stands 9 feet tall. His arms end in blades instead of hands, and when he moves, the ground actually cracks beneath him. Around us, seating rises into the sky, packed with beings from 100 worlds, all of them here to watch something die. Most of them are betting on me. Not because they respect me, because they think I am funny. A curiosity. The little pink ape from the primitive world that got led into the tournament by mistake, or by pity. Nobody is quite sure which. I heard one of the announcers, a floating orb of light with a voice like grinding metal, tell the crowd that humans were invited this cycle as, and I am quoting this exactly, a gesture of goodwill toward emerging species. Goodwill. Right. That is a polite way of saying nobody expected me to survive the first round. Threx does not wait for a signal. He charges, and the crowd roars, and for 1 full second I forget how to breathe. Then 12 years of fighting in cage rings back on Earth kicks in, and my body remembers what my mind forgot. I drop low, let his first strike pass over my head close enough to part my hair, and drive my shoulder into his knee. It should not work. He is made of stone, but stone breaks if you know exactly where to hit it, and I spent half my life learning exactly that. He staggers. The crowd goes quiet, just for a heartbeat, like they cannot quite process what they saw. I do not give him time to recover. I am already moving, already inside his guard, already doing the thing my old coach used to call ugly fighting, the kind of fighting nobody teaches you in a gym, because it is not pretty, it is just effective. I hit him in the joint behind his elbow. I hit him in the gap at his throat where the stone has not fully sealed. I do whatever it takes, because Threx is not going to show me mercy, and I am not going to waste time hoping for any. He roars and swings wild now, angry, off balance, and that is exactly what I want. An angry opponent makes mistakes. I duck under his arm, plant my feet, and throw everything I have left into his chest. He goes down. The arena goes silent, then explodes into noise, a wall of sound from thousands of voices in languages I do not understand, and a few that I do. I raise my hand, not in celebration, just to make sure the referee drone sees that the fight is over before Threx decides to get back up angry. That is round 1. There are 4 more to go. Round 2 is a pair of twins who fight as a single mind, moving in perfect mirror image of each other, which sounds impossible until you are standing between them getting hit from 2 directions at once. I win that one by doing something they clearly did not expect. I stop trying to beat them separately and instead force them together, so their own mirrored strikes collide with each other. It is not elegant. It works. Round 3 is against something that does not have a face, just a shifting mass of light and shadow that the announcers call a Drasani Sentinel. I have no idea how to fight something without a body until I notice it always circles left before it strikes. Once you know the pattern, you can break it. By round 4, something strange is happening in the stands. The mockery has stopped. The jokes about the little ape have gone quiet. Now there is a different kind of murmur running through the crowd, the kind of murmur that comes from beings realizing they might be watching something they will talk about for years. I do not have time to enjoy it. Round 4 nearly kills me. My opponent is fast, faster than anything I have fought so far, a hive mind duelist controlling 3 linked bodies at once. I take a hit across my ribs that drops me to 1 knee, and for a moment the world goes white and distant, and some small voice in my head says, maybe this is where it ends. I think about my crew waiting back at the ship. I think about the debt collector who is definitely still going to want his money whether I win or not. And somewhere in that mess of thoughts, something simpler surfaces. I am not done yet. I get back up. I do not remember deciding to. My body just does it. The fight ends with all three linked bodies on the ground and me barely standing, but standing. Round 5 is the final round, and my opponent is the reigning champion of 3 consecutive tournaments, an insectoid warrior named Carveth who has never lost a match in this arena. He is fast, precise, and utterly without emotion, which is somehow more frightening than any amount of rage would be. I will not pretend I remember every second of that fight clearly. It becomes a blur of movement, pain, and pure stubbornness. What I do remember is the moment near the end when Carveth has me pinned, his blade hovering an inch from my throat, and instead of giving up, I do something no one in that arena has apparently ever seen a competitor do. I bite him. It is not a technique. It is not honorable. It is exactly the kind of desperate, undignified move that gets you laughed out of any proper fighting tradition in the galaxy. But it buys me half a second, and half a second is all I need to twist free and drive my elbow into the one weak point I found earlier, the joint just beneath his mandible. Carveth goes down. The arena does not erupt this time. It goes completely, utterly silent, thousands of beings staring at the small human standing over the fallen champion, breathing hard, bleeding from more places than I want to count. Then the silence breaks into something enormous, a roar that shakes the stands, and I realize, distantly, through the ringing in my ears, that I have actually done it. I have won the Kael'thari sundering. I do not remember much of what happens next. I remember medical drones descending around me. I remember being lifted, or maybe carried, though my legs feel like they still want to hold my weight and simply cannot manage it. I remember flashes of light, the enormous ceiling of the arena spinning slowly above me, and somewhere in the noise, a voice announcing something in a language of trumpets and static that I do not understand. What I do understand, even through the haze, is the way the crowd's cheering changes. It goes from excitement to something quieter, something that sounds almost like shock, as if the announcement itself surprised them more than my winning did. I try to ask someone what is happening. My voice does not cooperate. Someone leans over me, a Kael'thari official in ceremonial robes, and says something that I am too exhausted to process. I only catch fragments. Champion, honor, bound. I do not know what any of that means yet. I only know that my body finally gives out, and the last thing I see before the world goes dark is a single unfamiliar face looking down at me with an expression I cannot read. Sharp eyes, pale skin with a faint shimmer to it, and an unreadable calm that feels completely out of place in the chaos around us. Then, nothing. When I wake up, the first thing I notice is that the pain is mostly gone. The second thing I notice is that I am not in my own ship. The room around me is unfamiliar, all smooth curved walls and soft light that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My ribs are wrapped in something that hums faintly and feels warm rather than sore. I sit up too fast, and my head spins. A voice speaks from somewhere near the door, calm and careful. "It's all right. You're safe." I turn and see a woman standing there, human, dressed in a uniform I recognize as belonging to Earth's small diplomatic mission, the tiny group of representatives sent along with competitors to make sure humanity did not embarrass itself too badly during our first real tournament appearance. Her name badge reads Grace Whitfield. "Where am I?" I ask, my voice rough. "Medical wing of the Sundering Complex," she says. "You won, Daniel. You actually won." I let that sink in for a second. I did notice that part, yes, I say. Feels like I got hit by a transport ship. "You got hit by 3 transport ships worth of opponents," she says, and for a moment there is something like relief in her voice, like she genuinely was not sure I would wake up talking. I try to sit up straighter, ignoring the way my ribs protest. "So what happens now? Do I get a trophy? A medal? Please tell me it is not a medal. I do not have anywhere to put a medal." Grace's expression shifts, just slightly, in a way that makes my stomach tighten before she even says anything. "There's something we need to talk about," she says. "About the prize. I already do not like where this is going." "Okay," I say slowly. "Talk." She takes a breath, glances toward the door, as if checking that no one else is listening, then looks back at me. "When our translators reviewed the tournament rules before you competed," she says, "there was a section about the grand prize that we may not have interpreted correctly." "May not have," I repeat. That is a very specific way of saying something went wrong. Grace does not answer right away, and that silence tells me more than any words could. Whatever this is, it is bigger than a medal, bigger than a trophy, bigger than anything I imagined when I stepped into that arena 4 hours and 1 lifetime ago. "Whatever you're about to tell me," I say, "I have a feeling I am not going to like it." She meets my eyes, and for the first time since I have known her, she looks genuinely uncertain about how to continue. "The prize was never a medal," she says finally. "It was a marriage." The room goes very quiet. Somewhere down the hall, I hear the low hum of machinery and the distant murmur of voices, speaking languages I still cannot understand. My mind is racing through everything that phrase could possibly mean, and none of the possibilities I come up with sound good. "A marriage," I repeat, because saying it out loud does not make it feel any less impossible. "To who?" Grace hesitates just long enough for the dread in my chest to fully settle in before she answers. "To the Princess Yissa Venthal Korathis," she says. "Heir to the Korathis dominion." I stare at her, waiting for the part where she tells me this is some kind of joke, some strange test of composure that competitors go through after a tournament. That part does not come. "I fought 5 rounds today," I say slowly. "I got bitten, thrown, nearly cut in half, and bitten again, this time by me, and you are telling me the actual prize the entire time was a wedding." Grace nods, and there is something almost apologetic in the gesture, like she knows exactly how absurd this sounds and has no better way to soften it. "I think," I say, "that somebody on our side made a very large mistake." "We're working on it," she says, though the way she says it does not exactly fill me with confidence. Before I can ask anything else, the door slides open, and a figure steps into the room. I recognize her instantly, even though I only saw her for a few blurred seconds before I passed out in the arena. Pale skin with that same faint shimmer, sharp eyes that seem to take in every detail of the room in an instant, an expression of complete and total calm that feels almost unnatural given the circumstances. She looks at me the way someone might examine a puzzle they already know the solution to. "So," she says, her voice smooth and edged with something I cannot quite place, "this is the human who broke tradition and bit the champion." I open my mouth to respond, then close it again, because I genuinely do not know what the correct response to that sentence is. Grace, to her credit, straightens up immediately. "Your Highness," she says, "we were just explaining the situation to him." The woman, Yissa, tilts her head slightly, studying me with an intensity that makes me feel like I am back in the arena, except this time I have no idea what move to make. "Then let me save you the trouble," she says, stepping further into the room. "I am Yissa Venthal Korathis, and as of your victory today, you are my intended husband." The words land somewhere between impossible and inevitable, like a sentence I heard clearly but still cannot quite believe is meant for me. I look at Grace. Grace looks at the floor. I look back at Yissa, who is watching me with an expression that is somehow both amused and completely unreadable. "There has to be some kind of mistake," I say, because it is the only thing my brain can produce. "There is no mistake," Yissa says calmly. "Only a translation neither of your ambassadors bothered to verify before agreeing to the terms." I sit there, ribs aching, head spinning, staring at a woman I have known for exactly 2 minutes, who has apparently just informed me that my entire future has changed because of one very badly translated tournament rule. Somewhere outside this room, I know there is chaos brewing, diplomats scrambling, alien nobility furious, and an entire empire suddenly paying very close attention to a human who 3 hours ago was worried about paying off a busted engine. I came here to win a tournament, I say quietly, mostly to myself. Issa's expression does not change, but there is something in her eyes that might be the beginning of a smile. Congratulations, she says. You did. The first attempt on my life happens before I even leave the medical wing. I am still getting used to the idea that I am somehow engaged to a woman I met 2 minutes ago when the lights in my room flicker, once, then go completely dark. Not the soft dimming of someone adjusting settings. A hard cut, the kind that means someone wanted the room dark on purpose. I do not wait to find out why. 12 years of fighting has trained my body to move before my mind fully catches up, and I am already rolling off the medical bed when something slices through the space where my head used to be. Grace shouts a warning half a second too late, but it does not matter, because I am already on the floor, already scrambling toward the wall, already trying to find whatever is trying to kill me in a room I cannot see across. A shape moves near the door, fast. Too fast for me to track cleanly in the dark, but I catch the outline of a blade and throw myself sideways just as it comes down where my chest was a moment earlier. The lights snap back on. Standing in the doorway is a Kael'thari guard, or someone dressed exactly like one, frozen mid-motion with a weapon raised, clearly not expecting the room to suddenly be lit again. Behind him, another figure stands, calm, arms folded, watching the entire scene unfold like she already knew exactly how it would end. Issa. The guard turns toward her, hesitates for a fraction of a second, and that hesitation is all Issa needs. She moves faster than I expect, faster than seems possible for someone dressed in formal robes, and disarms him with a motion so smooth it looks almost gentle, until you notice the way his arm bends afterward at an angle it should not bend. 2 of her own guards enter behind her and take the man into custody without a word. I stay flat against the wall, chest heaving, staring at the scene like I am still trying to process whether it actually happened. That was quick, I manage to say. Issa glances at me, unreadable as always. You expected them to wait, she says. It is not a question. I did not expect anyone to try at all, I say. I have been engaged for less than an hour. An hour is more than enough time for certain people to decide they would rather see you dead than married into my family, she says. Grace steps forward, visibly shaken, glancing between the restrained guard and Issa with the careful expression of someone trying to figure out how much of this disaster falls under her responsibility. Your Highness, she says, are you saying this was planned before the tournament even ended? Issa does not answer immediately. She studies the guard being led away, her expression unreadable, and then finally speaks, her tone flat and precise, like she is stating a simple fact rather than a threat. There are people in my court who do not want this marriage to happen, she says. They will not stop at one attempt. Great, I say. Wonderful. Exactly what I wanted to hear while lying on a floor in my pajamas. For the first time since I met her, something flickers across Issa's face that might almost be amusement. You fought 5 rounds today and bit the reigning champion, she says. I think you can survive a little more excitement. I want to argue with that, but honestly, she has a point. Over the next several hours, I learn more about the situation than I ever wanted to know. Grace, along with the rest of Earth's small diplomatic team, spends most of that time in a state somewhere between panic and cautious opportunism. On one hand, an actual human marrying into one of the most powerful ruling families in known space is a diplomatic disaster nobody prepared for. On the other hand, as one particularly blunt ambassador named Edward Sinclair puts it, during a tense meeting I am dragged into, despite barely being able to stand, it is also possibly the single greatest opportunity humanity has ever had to matter on the galactic stage. I do not love being talked about like a piece on a game board, I say during that meeting, arms crossed, still sore from nearly getting cut in half twice in one day. Edward, a tall man with the kind of practiced diplomatic calm that makes you immediately suspicious of everything he says, offers me an apologetic smile that does not quite reach his eyes. "Nobody is treating you like a game piece, Daniel," he says. "We are simply recognizing an opportunity that fell into our lap. An opportunity that nearly got my head removed 20 minutes ago," I point out. "That," he admits, "is an unfortunate complication." Complication. Right. Issa, seated at the far end of the room with the same calm composure she seems to carry everywhere, listens to the entire exchange without saying much. When she finally speaks, the room goes quiet immediately, in the way rooms tend to go quiet around people who are clearly used to being obeyed. "The marriage will proceed," she says. "Attempting to reverse the tournament's outcome would be seen as an insult to the entire sundering, and my family cannot afford that insult right now." Cannot afford it, I repeat. That sounds like there is more to this than tradition. Yisa's eyes flick toward me, something sharp and evaluating in her gaze, like she is deciding how much to reveal. "There is always more," she says simply, and offers nothing further. I want to press her on it, but before I can, the meeting is interrupted by an announcement over the room's communication system, a formal voice informing us that a court gathering has been called to formally recognize the marriage before the full assembly of the Korath's dominion. "Formal recognition," Grace repeats, glancing at me with something like sympathy. "That means the whole court will be there. Every noble family, every faction. Fantastic," I say. "So the people who already tried to kill me once tonight will now get to do it in front of an audience." Issa stands, smoothing her robes with practiced ease, entirely unbothered by the chaos swirling around us. "Then I suggest you fight as well in that room as you did in the arena," she says. I stare at her. That is somehow both a compliment and the least reassuring thing anyone has said to me all day. The court gathering takes place in a massive chamber built entirely from some pale, luminous stone that seems to glow faintly from within, lit by no visible source I can identify. Thousands of nobles fill tiered seating that rises in a circle around a central floor, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile as I walk in, dressed in unfamiliar formal clothing that Grace insisted I wear despite my protests. Whispers ripple through the crowd the moment I step onto the floor. I catch fragments of words in languages I do not understand, but I do not need translation to recognize contempt when I hear it. Issa walks beside me, back straight, expression composed, utterly unaffected by the sea of judgmental stares directed at both of us. "They do not like me very much," I mutter under my breath. "They do not know you at all," she replies quietly. "That is worse." Before I can ask what she means, a figure rises from an elevated seat near the front of the chamber, an older man with sharp features and an expression of carefully controlled disdain. Grace, standing near the edge of the room, leans toward me and whispers his name. "Vos Karen," she says. "The regent. He has been ruling in the princess's place until she comes of age to take the throne fully." "Regent," I repeat. "So he is basically in charge until she officially is." "Exactly," Grace says. "Which means this marriage complicates things for him significantly." Vos Karen's voice carries easily across the massive chamber without any need for amplification, smooth and controlled in a way that immediately puts me on edge. "We gather today," he announces, "to witness a union unlike any this court has seen, a human, victor of the sundering, bound to our future ruler by the ancient rules of the tournament." The way he says human makes it sound like an insult dressed up as a formal title. He continues, addressing the assembly with practiced authority. "Though many among us question whether this union serves the Dominion's interests, tradition demands we honor the tournament's outcome." I glance at Issa, whose expression has not shifted even slightly, though I notice her hands are clasped just a bit too tightly in front of her. However, Vos Karen continues, and here his tone sharpens slightly. Tradition also permits challenge. Any member of this court may contest the legitimacy of this union through honor combat, as has been the custom for generations. The chamber erupts into murmurs. Grace's hand tightens on my arm. "Did he just—" I start to ask. "He did," Issa says quietly, her jaw tight. He just opened the door for anyone in this room to challenge you directly. Before the murmurs even fully settle, a figure steps forward from the crowd, tall, armored, moving with the confident stride of someone who has fought and won many times before. He stops a short distance away and addresses the assembly directly. "I challenge the legitimacy of this union," he announces, his voice carrying easily. "I claim right of honor, combat against the human." The chamber falls silent, every eye turning toward me. I look at Issa. I look at Vos Karen, whose expression carries the faintest hint of satisfaction he is clearly trying to hide. I look at the armored figure standing across the floor from me, clearly expecting an easy victory over the small human who apparently only won his last fight by biting someone. I think, briefly, about the debt collector back home, about my ship, about the quiet life I thought I was going to have after this tournament ended. Then I roll my shoulders, ignore the ache still lingering in my ribs, and step forward. "I accept," I say. The chamber roars. The armored challenger's name is Draith Osimir, and according to Grace, who fills me in through hurried whispers while attendants prepare the combat floor, he comes from a noble family with strong ties to Vos Karen. Which means this challenge is not some spontaneous act of wounded honor. It is a setup, arranged in advance, designed to remove me before the marriage can be finalized. Knowing that does not make the enormous armored warrior standing across from me any less terrifying. The rules of honor combat, as explained to me quickly by one of Issa's attendants, are simple in principle and complicated in practice. The fight continues until one combatant yields, is incapacitated, or dies. Weapons are permitted, though traditionally challengers choose blades. There is no time limit. There is no referee to stop things if they go too far. "Fantastic," I mutter, rolling my shoulders as attendants hand me a blade I have never used before in my life. Truly a fair fight. Yisa appears at my side just before the combat begins, her expression unreadable but her voice low and urgent. "Draith fights with a heavy blade," she says quickly. "He relies on strength and reach. He is not fast, and he is not clever. He wins through intimidation before the fight even starts." "Good to know," I say. "Any other advice?" "Survive," she says simply, and steps back before I can respond. The chamber falls into a tense hush as Draith and I move to opposite ends of the combat floor. Vos Karen, seated in his elevated position, raises a hand, and the moment it falls, the fight begins. Draith charges immediately, exactly as Issa described, relying on the sheer force of his approach to overwhelm me before I can think. I sidestep at the last possible moment, letting his heavy blade cut through empty air where I stood a half-second earlier, and use the opening to strike at the back of his knee. He staggers but does not fall, stronger than I expected. He turns, faster than his size suggests he should be able to, and swings again. I block this time, and the impact travels up my arm like a shockwave, nearly knocking the blade from my grip entirely. Okay, I think. Strength and reach. Got it. Time to stop meeting him head-on. I spend the next several exchanges doing exactly what worked against Threx back in the tournament arena, refusing to fight the fight my opponent wants. Instead of matching his strength, I stay mobile, circling, forcing him to keep turning, keep adjusting, keep working harder than he expected to for every strike. It frustrates him visibly. His swings grow wider, less controlled, driven more by irritation than technique. That is exactly the mistake I am waiting for. When he overextends on a particularly wide swing, I duck inside his guard, drop my shoulder into his exposed side, and drive the flat of my blade hard against the same knee I struck earlier. This time, he goes down. The chamber goes silent for a heartbeat, the same kind of stunned silence I remember from the arena, before I press the tip of my blade lightly against his throat, not enough to cut, just enough to make the point clearly. "Yield," I say. Draith glares up at me, humiliation written across every line of his face, but after a long moment, he grits out the word. "Yield." I step back immediately, lowering my blade, and the chamber erupts into noise, though this time the reaction feels different from before. Less mockery, more genuine shock. Vos Karen's expression, from what I can see across the distance, has gone carefully blank, the kind of blank that suggests deep displeasure being forcibly restrained. Issa reaches me quickly, her composure cracking just slightly, something that might almost be relief flashing across her features before she smooths it away. "You survived," she says quietly. "Barely," I admit, breathing hard. "Barely is enough," she says. The formal recognition ceremony proceeds without further challenges that day, though the tension in the chamber never fully disappears. By the time it concludes, I am exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with physical exertion, the kind of tired that comes from spending hours surrounded by people who would rather see you dead than accept your existence. That exhaustion does not last long, because the real danger, as I quickly learn, does not come from open challenges on a combat floor. It comes quietly, at a banquet held that evening to celebrate the union, disguised as hospitality. The banquet hall is even more overwhelming than the combat chamber, filled with long tables of food I do not recognize, served by attendants moving with practiced efficiency among nobles who watch me with the same mixture of curiosity and hostility I am beginning to expect as the default response to my existence. I am seated beside Issa at the head table, and for the first time since this entire situation began, we have a moment that is not immediately interrupted by violence or political maneuvering. "You fight well," she says quietly, not looking at me directly, her attention seemingly focused on the hall around us. "For someone with no proper training in our traditions. I had some experience before I got here," I say. "Clearly," she says, and there is something almost like approval in her tone. "Can I ask you something?" I say. She glances at me, waiting. "Why does this marriage matter so much to you?" I ask. "You could have found a way out of it, annulled it, claimed some kind of exception. Instead, you are defending it like your life depends on it." Something shifts in her expression, quick and guarded, gone almost as soon as it appears. "Because it might," she says quietly, and before I can ask what that means, an attendant approaches the table carrying a tray of drinks, specifically prepared for the newly recognized couple. Something about the attendant's posture catches my attention immediately. It is subtle, barely noticeable, but after years of reading opponents in a fighting ring, I have learned to notice the small things. The way his eyes do not quite meet Yissa's, the way his hands are just slightly too steady, too controlled, like someone concentrating very hard on not showing nervousness. I reach out and grab his wrist before he can set the tray down. Everyone at the table freezes. The attendant's eyes widen, just slightly, and that tiny reaction is all the confirmation I need. Issa's own guards move quickly, seizing the attendant before he can react further, and within moments, one of the drinks is confirmed to contain a substance that, according to a hurried explanation from Grace, would have caused symptoms mimicking natural illness before proving fatal within hours. The banquet hall descends into chaos, nobles murmuring urgently among themselves, guards moving through the crowd, Vos Karen's expression once again carefully composed in a way that feels deliberately calm given the circumstances. Issa turns to me, and for the first time since I met her, there is something in her expression that looks genuinely shaken. "How did you notice?" she asks quietly. "I have spent a lot of time reading people who want to hurt me," I say. "You learn the signs." She studies me for a long moment, something calculating behind her eyes, before she speaks again, her voice lower now, meant only for me. "We need to talk," she says. "Somewhere private." Grace tries to insist on accompanying us, citing diplomatic protocol and general concerns about my safety, but Issa dismisses the suggestion with a single sharp look that ends the argument immediately. We end up in a quiet chamber somewhere deep within the palace, far from the noise of the banquet hall, lit softly by the same strange ambient light that seems to fill every room in this place. Issa paces slowly, arms crossed, clearly working through something in her mind before she finally speaks. My uncle wants me removed from succession, she says without preamble. He has wanted it for years, long before your tournament victory complicated things further. I lean against the wall, arms crossed, watching her carefully. Removed how? I ask, though some part of me already suspects the answer. However necessary, she says flatly. Assassination attempts against me are not new. This marriage was never something that happened to me by accident, Daniel. I made sure it happened. That gets my attention immediately. What do you mean you made sure? I ask. She stops pacing and finally meets my eyes directly. The tournament's grand prize has existed as an option for centuries, she says. It is rarely chosen and rarely enforced because it requires the ruling family's willing participation. I ensured it was activated this cycle. Why, I ask, though part of me is beginning to understand. Because a marriage recognized before the full assembly, witnessed by every noble family in the Dominion, is far harder to quietly undo than a princess with no husband and no protection beyond her own guards, she says. My uncle can arrange accidents for an unmarried heir far more easily than he can arrange one for a married one, especially one married to a victor of the Sundering who has already proven he does not go down easily. I stare at her, processing everything she just told me. So this was never a mistake, I say slowly. You planned this. You used me. I did what was necessary to survive, she says, her voice hard now, defensive. I am not sorry for that. Part of me wants to be angry. Part of me is angry. But another part, the part that has spent the last day watching how carefully, how precisely, everyone around this court moves against each other, understands exactly why someone in her position might make exactly this kind of choice. You could have told me, I say finally. Would you have believed me, she asks. Would you have agreed to any of this if I told you the truth from the beginning? I do not have a good answer for that, and we both know it. Before either of us can say anything further, the chamber's door bursts open, and one of Issa's personal guards rushes in, breathless, urgency written across every line of her posture. Your Highness, the guard says quickly, the attendant who attempted the poisoning has been questioned. He has confessed to receiving orders directly from someone within the regent's household. Issa's expression hardens instantly, all traces of vulnerability disappearing behind a mask of cold determination. Bring me everything you have, she says. Every detail. The guard nods and hurries out, and Issa turns back to me, something resolved settling into her posture. This is no longer simply about survival, she says. This is about proving, in front of the entire court, that my uncle has moved against both of us directly. If we can expose that, his position becomes untenable. And if we cannot, I ask, then we should both prepare for more nights like this one, she says grimly. I look at her for a long moment, weighing everything I have learned in the span of a single impossible day. The marriage that was never an accident. The uncle who wants us both dead. The poison that nearly succeeded because of how carefully it was disguised as hospitality. I did not come to this galaxy looking for a war, I say finally. Issa's expression softens just slightly, though the determination in her eyes never wavers. No, she agrees, but it seems the war found you anyway. The accusation comes 3 days later, delivered in front of the entire assembled court, with the same theatrical precision Voss Karen seems to apply to everything he does. I am summoned to the great chamber without warning, pulled from a training session Issa arranged to help me understand at least the basics of proper court combat traditions, and by the time I arrive, still dressed in training clothes, sweat still cooling on my skin, I already know something is very wrong. The chamber is packed, more crowded than it was even for the formal recognition ceremony, and the air itself feels heavier, charged with something I cannot quite name, until Voss Karen rises from his seat and begins speaking. 3 nights ago, he announces, his voice carrying easily across the silent chamber, Lord Draeth Osimir, who honorably challenged the human known as Daniel Hartley and yielded that challenge in accordance with tradition, was found dead in his private chambers. The chamber erupts into murmurs, but Voss Karen raises a hand, and the noise dies down almost immediately. Preliminary investigation, he continues, has revealed evidence suggesting the human responsible for defeating him in combat returned later that same night to finish what honor combat did not permit him to complete. I feel the blood drain from my face. That is not true, I say immediately, my voice cutting through the murmurs. I have not left the guest quarters assigned to me since the ceremony. Voss Karen regards me with an expression of practiced, patient patience, the kind used by someone who has already anticipated exactly this response. The investigation has uncovered evidence suggesting otherwise, he says smoothly, and gestures to an attendant who steps forward carrying a small device. The device projects a recording, grainy and dim, showing a figure moving through a darkened corridor, roughly my height, roughly my build, wearing clothing similar to what I wore during the ceremony. The recording is brief, deliberately unclear, but the implication is obvious to everyone watching. That is not me, I say firmly. The evidence suggests otherwise, Voss Karen repeats, his tone maddeningly calm. I glance at Issa, standing rigid beside me, her expression carefully neutral in a way that I am beginning to recognize as the mask she wears when she is furious but cannot show it. This is fabricated, she says, her voice sharp enough to cut through the chamber's murmurs. My husband has guards posted outside his chambers at all times. Consult them. Voss Karen's expression flickers, just slightly, before he recovers his composure. The guards on duty that evening have already been questioned, he says. Unfortunately, they report seeing nothing unusual. Of course they do, I mutter under my breath, and Yisa shoots me a warning look that tells me clearly this is not the moment for sarcasm, even the deserved kind. By tradition, Voss Karen continues, addressing the full assembly now, an accusation of this severity against a member of the royal household, even one so newly joined, must be formally investigated by the full council before any judgment is rendered. Until that investigation concludes, the human will remain under guard within the palace, and the marriage recognition will be suspended pending the outcome. The chamber breaks into a wave of reaction, some nobles murmuring approval, others looking genuinely troubled by the sudden turn of events. Issa's grip on my arm tightens, though her expression never wavers from its careful composure. This is exactly what he wants, she says quietly, only for me to hear. Delay, doubt. A reason to keep the marriage suspended long enough to find another way to remove you entirely. We need to prove it is fabricated, I say. We need more than that, she says. We need to prove who actually did this, and why. Over the following 2 days, confined to my quarters under guard while the formal investigation proceeds at what feels like a deliberately slow pace, I have far too much time to think, and Yisa, visiting when she can slip away from the increasingly hostile political environment surrounding us, uses that time to dig into exactly the questions the court seems uninterested in asking. The recording, she tells me during one of these visits, keeping her voice low even though we are alone, was clearly staged. The figure's movements do not match your training patterns at all. Whoever created this either did not study you closely or wanted it to be unconvincing to anyone who actually looked carefully. Then why hasn't anyone noticed that? I ask. Because my uncle controls who reviews the evidence, she says grimly, and because most of the court wants to believe it, regardless of how convincing it actually is. Grace, who has been working the diplomatic angle relentlessly since the accusation was made, arrives during one visit with news that shifts everything. We trace the device used to create that recording, she says, breathless from moving quickly through the palace corridors. It uses technology that does not originate anywhere in the Korathis dominion. Where does it come from? Issa asks sharply. Grace hesitates, glancing between us before answering. Preliminary analysis suggests it matches technology used by the Thren Collective, she says. Issa's expression darkens immediately, and I can tell from her reaction alone that this name carries weight I do not fully understand. Who are the Thren Collective? I ask. An expansionist power on the far edge of Dominion territory, Issa says, her voice tight. They have wanted influence over Korath's space for generations, but our alliances with neighboring systems have kept them at bay. And you think my uncle is working with them, I finish. I think, she says slowly, that my uncle would very much like to see the Dominion weakened enough that an outside power could offer him support in exchange for concessions he could never justify to this court openly. The pieces begin fitting together in a way that makes my stomach turn. This was never simply about removing an inconvenient human from the succession picture. It was about weakening the entire Dominion at a moment when humanity's unexpected arrival on the galactic stage was creating exactly the kind of instability an outside power could exploit. We need proof, I say. Real proof, not just suspicion. Yissa nods, already turning toward the door. I know someone within the household staff who may have seen something useful, she says. It will take time to approach them carefully. Before she can leave, Grace stops her with a hand raised gently, an uncomfortable expression crossing her face. There is something else, Grace says quietly, and something in her tone makes both of us go still. What? I ask. Grace hesitates, clearly struggling with whatever she is about to say. Edward received a message from Earth's Central Diplomatic Office, she says finally, reviewing the original tournament rule interpretation. And, I press. The message indicates, she says slowly, that certain officials were aware, before you competed, that the grand prize included the marriage clause. The room goes very quiet. Aware, I repeat. You mean they knew? Grace's expression is pained. They calculated the potential political value if a human competitor won and the clause was invoked, she says. They allowed the ambiguity to stand rather than clarify it beforehand, believing the outcome, however it unfolded, would create leverage for humanity's diplomatic position. I feel something cold settle in my chest, a different kind of anger than what I felt toward Voss Karen, quieter but somehow sharper. So my own people gambled with my life, I say slowly, for a political opportunity. Grace does not try to defend it. I am sorry, Daniel, she says. I did not know either, not until this message arrived. Issa watches me carefully, something unreadable in her expression. It seems, she says quietly, that both of us were used as pieces in games we did not fully understand. I let that sink in, the sheer scale of it, the layers of manipulation from both my own side and hers, everyone maneuvering around two people who were simply trying to survive the situations placed in front of them. Then I suppose, I say finally, we should stop being pieces and start playing the game ourselves. Issa's expression shifts, something sharp and determined, replacing the tension that has been building since Grace's revelation. Agreed, she says, which means we need that proof, and we need it before the council convenes to render judgment. The council convenes in 4 days, Grace says. Then we have 4 days, Issa says. Over those 4 days, the investigation unfolds carefully and quietly. Issa working her contacts within the household staff, while Grace and Edward push whatever diplomatic pressure they can bring to bear on the situation from Earth's side. I remain confined to my quarters, unable to do much beyond wait, which is possibly the hardest fight I have faced since arriving in this galaxy. On the 3rd day, Issa arrives with an expression I have not seen on her before, something between triumph and barely controlled fury. We found him, she says without preamble, the attendant who actually murdered Draith. He was paid directly through an account traced back to my uncle's personal household funds, and the technology used to fabricate the recording came through a contact with confirmed ties to the Thren Collective. Is it enough? I ask. It is enough to bring before the council, she says. Whether it is enough to convince them depends on how well we present it, and how hard my uncle fights back once he realizes what we have found. I stand, ignoring the ache still lingering from days of forced inactivity, and meet her eyes directly. Then let's make sure he does not have room to fight back at all, I say. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, Issa actually smiles, small and sharp, but genuine. I was hoping you would say that, she says. The council chamber on the Day of Judgment is fuller than I have ever seen it, every noble family of the Korathis Dominion represented, along with representatives from neighboring systems who apparently consider this proceeding important enough to attend in person. Grace tells me quietly, just before we enter, that word of the accusation and the marriage's suspension has spread across the Dominion faster than anyone anticipated, turning what should have been an internal court matter into something the entire region is now watching closely. No pressure, I mutter as we walk in together. None at all, Grace agrees, her tone carrying exactly the amount of sarcasm the situation deserves. Voss Karen sits in his elevated position at the front of the chamber, flanked by council members who will render judgment based on whatever evidence is presented today. His expression carries the same practiced calm I have come to expect from him, though I notice, or maybe I only imagine, the faintest hint of tension around his eyes. Issa stands beside me, composed, regal, utterly in control despite the enormous stakes riding on the next hour. When the proceedings begin, Voss Karen speaks first, reiterating the accusation against me with the same smooth precision as before, presenting the recording once again to the assembled council as evidence of my supposed guilt. When he finishes, silence falls over the chamber, and every eye turns toward Issa and me, waiting to see how we respond. Issa steps forward, her voice carrying easily across the massive space without any need to raise it. "Honored council," she begins, "my husband has been falsely accused of a crime he did not commit, based on evidence fabricated using technology that does not originate anywhere within Dominion borders." Murmurs ripple through the crowd immediately. Voss Karen's expression tightens, just slightly, before he responds. "A serious claim," he says smoothly, "one that requires equally serious proof." "We have proof," Issa says, and gestures toward the entrance, where two of her guards escort in a nervous, clearly frightened attendant, the same one who actually murdered Draith Osimir, now prepared, according to what Issa explained to me earlier, to testify in exchange for leniency. The attendant's testimony unfolds carefully, guided by questions Issa poses with the precision of someone who has clearly prepared every word in advance. He describes receiving payment through an account linked directly to Voss Karen's personal household funds. He describes being provided with technology he did not recognize, later confirmed to originate from contacts within the Thren Collective, to fabricate a recording implicating me in a crime I never committed. The chamber erupts into open murmuring now, no longer contained by Voss Karen's usual composure. "This is a fabrication," Voss Karen says, his voice rising slightly for the first time since I have known him. "A desperate attempt by the human and his conspirator to escape justified accusation." "Is it?" Issa says calmly, producing a data device of her own and presenting it to the council directly. "Because we also traced the financial records independently, through channels entirely separate from anything my husband or I could have fabricated ourselves." The council members lean forward, examining the evidence presented, murmuring among themselves in a language too quick for me to follow completely, though the tone alone tells me the tide is shifting. Voss Karen rises fully from his seat now, his composure finally cracking under the weight of everything being laid out before the assembly. "Even if these records are genuine," he says, his voice sharp, "they prove nothing beyond a single corrupted attendant acting alone for his own reasons. They prove exactly what you hoped they would never need to explain," Issa says, stepping forward, her voice hardening into something cold and precise. "That you have been in contact with the Thren Collective, an outside power-seeking influence over Dominion territory, and that you were willing to see this Dominion weakened through internal conflict rather than accept a marriage that threatened your control over the succession." The chamber falls into stunned silence. Voss Karen's expression shifts through several emotions in quick succession: anger, calculation, and finally something that looks almost like resignation, though he tries to mask it quickly. "You have no proof of any direct connection between myself and the Thren Collective," he says, though the confidence in his voice has noticeably weakened. "Actually," Grace says, stepping forward for the first time, "we do, Every eye in the chamber turns toward her. Earth's diplomatic mission, she continues, has independent monitoring capabilities not tied to Dominion infrastructure. When we identified Thren collective technology involved in this case, we conducted our own investigation, separate from anything the princess or her husband could access. She presents a second data device, and the council members review it with growing expressions of concern as the details unfold. Communications intercepted between an unidentified party within the Dominion and known Thren collective operatives discussing exactly the kind of destabilization Vos Karen has apparently been quietly encouraging. I did not authorize any of Earth's forces to conduct independent surveillance within Dominion territory, Vos Karen says, his voice tight now, clearly grasping for any argument that might slow the momentum building against him. You did not need to authorize it, Edward says calmly, stepping forward to stand beside Grace. Diplomatic protections extended to visiting delegations include standard monitoring for the safety of our own personnel. We simply happened to notice something relevant. I almost laugh at the sheer audacity of that explanation, delivered with such perfect diplomatic calm that even Vos Karen seems momentarily unable to formulate a response. The council chamber has shifted entirely now, nobles murmuring urgently among themselves, several council members leaning close together in hushed conversation, clearly weighing the implications of what has just been presented. Finally, one of the senior council members rises, an elderly figure whose presence seems to command instant respect throughout the chamber. Regent Vos Karen, she says, her voice carrying easily despite its age. The evidence presented raises serious questions regarding your conduct and loyalty to this Dominion. This council will require immediate access to all financial and communication records associated with your household for full review. Vos Karen's expression finally breaks entirely, the careful mask he has worn throughout this entire ordeal crumbling into something raw and furious. You would take the word of an outsider ape and his desperate accomplice over years of service to this Dominion, he snarls, and the chamber gasps at the venom in his voice, the sudden loss of composure revealing far more than any evidence could have. I step forward before I can stop myself, ignoring the way Issa's hand tightens on my arm in silent warning. Years of service, that apparently included selling out your own people to an outside power the moment your position was threatened, I say, my voice carrying clearly across the silent chamber. That does not sound like loyalty to me. That sounds like exactly the kind of desperation that comes from someone who never actually cared about this Dominion at all, only about keeping his own power. The chamber remains silent for a long moment, and I brace myself, half expecting my words to be dismissed as exactly the kind of outsider opinion Vos Karen just accused me of offering. Instead, several council members nod slowly, and I catch murmurs of quiet agreement rippling through portions of the crowd. The elderly council member who spoke earlier regards me with an expression I cannot quite read before turning back toward Vos Karen. Regent, she says formally, until this investigation concludes, you are relieved of all regency duties, effective immediately. Vos Karen's face contorts with fury, and for one terrifying moment, I genuinely believe he might attempt something reckless right there in the chamber. Instead, after a long, tense pause, he simply straightens his robes, offers the council a stiff, formal bow that somehow manages to convey pure contempt, and allows himself to be escorted from the chamber by guards summoned at the elderly council member's gesture. The moment he disappears through the chamber doors, the entire hall seems to exhale collectively, tension breaking into a wave of urgent conversation among the assembled nobles. Issa turns to me, her composure finally cracking into something genuinely relieved, something almost fragile beneath the regal exterior she has maintained through every impossible moment of the past several days. We did it, she says quietly, meant only for me. We did it, I agree, and for the first time since arriving in this galaxy, I actually let myself believe it. The formal reinstatement of the marriage recognition takes place 3 days later, in the same great chamber where everything began, though the atmosphere feels entirely different this time. Fewer hostile stares, fewer whispered insults. If anything, the nobles gathered seemed to regard me now with something closer to grudging respect, the kind reserved for someone who proved himself capable of surviving far more than anyone expected. Voss Karen's investigation, according to updates Issa receives regularly throughout those 3 days, continues to uncover deeper connections to the Thren Collective. Evidence suggesting his betrayal ran even further than initially suspected. Secret agreements promising territorial concessions in exchange for support securing his position permanently once Issa was removed from the succession entirely. The full scope of it, Issa tells me the evening before the ceremony, still turns my stomach. At least it is over now, I say. This part of it, she agrees, though I imagine we have not seen the last of the Thren Collective's interest in Dominion affairs. Something to worry about another day, I say. She glances at me, something warmer than I have seen from her before settling into her expression. A very human way of looking at things, she says. Maybe, I admit. But it got me through 5 rounds of a tournament and an assassination attempt during breakfast, so I am inclined to trust it. The ceremony itself unfolds with far less drama than anything that preceded it, which after the past several days feels almost strange in its simplicity. Issa and I stand before the assembled court, the same elderly council member who challenged Voss Karen, now presiding over the formal recognition, her voice carrying the weight of tradition as she speaks the words that bind our futures together in the eyes of the entire Dominion. Somewhere in the crowd, I catch sight of Grace, standing beside Edward, both of them wearing expressions of quiet satisfaction that suggest they are already thinking several steps ahead toward whatever diplomatic opportunities this entire situation has opened up for humanity's future in galactic affairs. I decide for now not to think too hard about that. When the ceremony concludes and the chamber erupts into applause, genuine this time, rather than the shocked, uncertain reaction from days before, Issa turns to me with an expression that finally, completely, drops the careful political mask she has worn since the moment we met. "Thank you," she says quietly, "meant only for me, for fighting for something that started as nothing more than a mistake in translation." I look at her, at the woman who used a translation error to save her own life, who fought beside me against a conspiracy neither of us fully understood when it began, who somehow, through all of it, became someone I genuinely respect rather than simply an obligation forced upon me by a tournament rule I never read carefully enough. It stopped being a mistake somewhere along the way, I say. She smiles, small and genuine, the same smile I glimpsed once before during the darkest moment of our investigation, and this time it does not disappear quickly. Somewhere in the back of my mind I think about my old ship, still waiting somewhere for me, about the debt collector who probably still wants his money, about the strange, impossible journey that brought me from a broken engine and empty pockets to standing in a palace as the husband of a woman who will one day rule an entire dominion. I came to this galaxy looking for scrap parts and enough credits to fix my ship, I think, watching the crowd celebrate around us, listening to Issa laugh quietly at something Grace says as she approaches to offer congratulations. Instead, I found a fight worth winning, a partner worth trusting, and a place in history nobody, including myself, ever expected a stubborn, undignified, thoroughly human fighter to earn. Not bad, I think, for a species they once called an insult to the tournament's honor. Not bad at all.